Hi everyone, we will wait for 1 or 2 minutes before we start the webinar. Thank you. For those who have joined, we're just giving an additional minute as people are still joining, and we will start the webinar in about a minute. I think we are going to start now. I've been just monitoring the attendees as they are joining, and for the last 1 or 2 minutes, I don't think we are having any additional attendance participants joining. So just by way of introduction, my name is Pankaj Bhatia, and I'm currently serving as the Acting Director of WRI's Global Climate Program. And I also, in my more normal duties, I'm the Deputy Director of the Climate Program. I think as some of you perhaps may know, our Global Climate Director who was with us, Paula, she just recently left, and I have taken over that duty and will continue to serve in that role until we hire our new Global Climate Director. So first of all, greetings to everybody who has joined, and welcome to the first webinar in the 2018 Climate Tracking and Transparency webinar series. World Resources Institute's Tracking and Strengthening Climate Action Initiative, also known as TASCA, together with the Partnership on Transparency in the Paris Agreement, known as PAPA, are pleased to launch this series as we explore critical topics to support domestic transparency systems. These webinars will feature presentations and interactive discussion among experts, practitioners, and national government representatives. Next slide, please. On today's webinar, first I will provide you all some basic instructions for participation. Then I'll give you a quick overview of the TASCA project and PAPA initiative and introduce the panelists and hand it over to the panelists. Following the introductions, we will hear from 3 panelists who will share views on measuring corporate and facility level emissions. Each of the presentations will be followed by a question and answer session where attendees will be able to submit questions directly to the panelists. Next slide, please. So some instructions for the participation today. During this webinar, attendees will remain in listen-only mode. Participants may raise comments or questions throughout the webinar by typing them into the questions pane in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you are having trouble with audio or video, please send a message to my colleague Pauline Hill at pauline.hill@wri.org, who is running today's webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be also provided online. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview on TASCA. TASCA project is managed by WRI and aims to support governments to be able to transparently communicate progress towards their NDCs, meet international accounting and reporting requirements, account for their commitments, and identify additional abatement opportunities to support national dialogue on future commitments. We currently work in 5 countries: Colombia, Ethiopia, India, Indonesia, South Africa. Specific activities depend on each country, but lessons learned and resources developed are shared globally. In addition to our work in country, TASCA actively supports enhancing international transparency. We provide timely research and analysis to support the negotiations and convene dialogues and discussions with country parties to consider different options. We're also developing new tools to support analysis for decision-making and tracking implementation. The project will run from 2017 to 2018. Next slide, please. The Partnership on Transparency in the Paris Agreement, PATPA, was launched in 2010 at the Petersburg Climate Dialogue by South Africa, the Republic of Korea, and Germany. PATPA promotes ambitious climate action through practical exchange on enhanced transparency to support achievement of the global temperature goal. PATPA supports its mission through policy dialogues and convenings to build capacity and encourage peer exchange, and develops research products to disseminate knowledge. This is my final slide and part of my welcome remarks also. And I think I will be, after this, will be handing over to our panelists. We have 2 panelists who will walk you through their presentation. First, we will hear from Neelam Singh, a senior associate at WRI. Then we have 2 special guest panelists from Colombia who will share their experience. Sandro Bravo Cardova, who is our point of contact for the work in Colombia, and Sebastian Carranza, climate change specialist, Ministry of Environment in Colombia. So again, welcome to you all to this first webinar. I hope it is useful and you find it useful, and you would also participate by asking your questions. Please feel free to submit your questions, as I mentioned, through the chat box. Let me now hand the presentation over to Neelam. Thank you.
Thank you, Pankaj. I hope everybody can hear me. Just give me a second here for the presentation to come back up. But in the meantime, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on your time zones. And once again, welcome to today's webinar on measuring corporate and facility level emissions. I'll kick off these content-specific slides, and will also invite my colleagues from Colombia, Sebastian and Sandra, as we proceed through the presentation. So in my slides, the next few slides, I'll focus on explaining about greenhouse gas reporting programs and discuss a few key foundational steps in designing these reporting programs, which are essential to MRV of emissions. So let's start with this first slide in front of us, MRV of mitigation, and different types of MRVs that exist. So you can't do much about anything that you cannot measure. This holds true whether you want to improve your own personal running time or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. MRV of emissions and emissions reductions is necessary to ensure that efforts to combat climate change are working and paying off. It is critical to understand and assess whether the world is on track to limit temperature rise to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius range. Depending on what's being measured and tracked, there are 3 different types of MRV of mitigation: measuring emissions, measuring emission reductions or mitigation actions, or change in emissions. So not just emissions, but you're looking at the change in emissions, impact of various mitigation actions. And the third type is measuring climate finance, measuring financial support that is directed at mitigation actions, at capacity building, and other climate actions trying to tackle climate change. This particular, the focus of this presentation is one kind of MRV, and within that, one kind of MRV of emissions. So MRV of GHG emissions in particular is conducted at national, organizational, national or subnational, or at an organizational level, or at a facility level, like the plant level, the unit level, to understand that entity's emissions profile and report it in the form of an emissions inventory. For example, countries report their emissions from energy, industry, etc. in a national inventory, and companies may measure and report emissions from their activities in organizational level inventories on an annual basis. Entity level MRV at the organization or facility level is the focus of our presentation today, as opposed to national or subnational level emissions, MRV. Another thing I want to point out is that for the purposes of our session today, we are focusing on programs that policymakers can put in place, or these can also be put in place by non-governmental organizations. Doesn't have to be necessarily a governmental organization, but these sort of setups and the programs that can be put in place that can institutionalize the process of MRV of emissions at corporate or facility level. WRI does run webinars and training programs on measuring, which are looking more at the corporate entities themselves, the companies. They're geared at the companies to set up their, to help them set up their emissions inventory, develop their emissions inventory, and what kind of details need to be kept in mind. So that's a separate series of training, and this one is focused more on institutionalizing the process through the creation of these greenhouse gas reporting programs. So what are GHG reporting programs, and how do they help in MRV of emissions at entity level? At their very core, reporting programs collect and track emissions data at the level of individual emitters, that is, facilities, installations, or companies at regular intervals. These encompass a set of components, various components, the program administrating agency, the reporting entities themselves, of course, and a host of other supporting components to effectively implement the program. So for instance, service providers, such as practitioners to help develop emissions reports, verifiers, etc. Database management system to input, aggregate, track, and analyze emissions data. Prescribed calculation methodologies to determine emissions from various sources. So all this together is can be referred to as reporting program system. These can be voluntary or mandatory, and most of what I will talk today applies equally to both kind of programs. Well, not entirely equally, but it could apply to both kind of programs. GHG reporting programs are also referred to as facility level MRV systems. And because they help with MRV of emissions. Just a few points on how reporting programs, or in what way programs can facilitate MRV of emissions. They do so by collecting data from emitters, which can help increase transparency and accountability, improve accuracy and quality of data by prescribing, for instance, calculation methodologies, by prescribing various quality control and quality assurance measures. They enhance comparability of data because everybody is playing by the same rules, hopefully. They allow the tracking of progress to determine, to demonstrate impact of policies depending on the data collected, even or the sectors that have been covered, even if the focus is on facility level emissions tracking. And potentially increasing the possibility of accessing international finance for various initiatives and policies that rest on good quality data, such as carbon tax or cap and trade. Okay, so these are, there are a number of reporting programs that have come up across the world, both mandatory and voluntary program. The presentation today is based on a publication we did a couple of years ago on design guide for mandatory reporting programs. And we looked at about 14 various reporting programs, and this slide shows some of the ones that we looked at. They were both in developed world, like in UK, in the US, in at the subnational level also, such as in California, or at a international level, such as in the EU, or also programs that were at that time coming up in South Africa and China. They are becoming more and more common, and there are many more voluntary programs. So just a word on the differences between mandatory and voluntary programs. They both have their respective roles to play, and this is not putting one against the other, just trying to illustrate the differences. So as the name suggests, mandatory programs tend to be more prescriptive, which brings more consistency in reporting, whereas voluntary programs provide greater flexibility to the entities. Mandatory programs are likely to be at a facility level, while voluntary programs are generally designed at the company level. There are a few exceptions, such as in Australia. Then mandatory programs are likely to be a reporting scheme, purely a reporting scheme with no accompanying reduction targets. And it is more common to see companies reporting on emissions reductions as well in a voluntary program. This is the guide that I was talking about, the design guide for designing mandatory reporting programs. It discusses the role that policymakers can play in each step of designing the program, and importantly, what kind of factors they should consider when making decisions related to each step of designing. These are a few steps that are summarized here in one slide, which the publication goes into a great detail. So just to talk a little bit about how to design these reporting programs, the 4 steps given here are not rigidly sequential steps, and there's likely to be some parallel or back and forth movement, especially in the first 3 steps. But essentially, it involves determining the objectives of the program, creating an enabling environment that can support this program as it is being designed and put in place, and then through implementation. And the 3rd step is to determine the program structure, which is where a lot of the the entire program, this is where the crux of the activity is happening. So let's look at the very first step of determining program objectives. And I couldn't emphasize the importance of this step more. The objectives are important because they influence program design decisions at every stage as you begin to design it. So as they say, form follows function. So it is important to get these right in the beginning, and to decide on these, deliberate on it very, very consciously. It is common to see programs serving multiple objectives, and these objectives can evolve over time as the national, the political, industrial, or international landscape changes, country priorities change, and other policies emerge that may need to be supported by the program. So there needs to be some flexibility, but at the same time, it's good to determine these in the beginning to the degree of specificity that's possible. These are some examples of objectives that you can see in various reporting programs. And in the interest of time, I will not go through these in further detail. Moving on, the next step is looking at this enabling environment, creating this ecosystem that can support the reporting program. And here there are three broad categories to look into: the legal architecture, which putting in place a strong legal architecture. If you're talking of a mandatory program, of course, that will not be needed for a voluntary program. Building stakeholder support and adequate institutional, human, and financial resources to design and implement the program. So for establishing a legal architecture refers to putting in place the framework of primary law that mandates entities to report, and supporting rules and regulations that then specify the arrangements necessary to make this happen. Again, I'm also looking at the clock and mindful of the other two presenters. I'll move on. So the next few slides are on building capacity, and which is also very important factors of building capacity within the jurisdiction, which involves capacity building among administrators themselves as well as the reporting entities. This capacity is what will eventually sustain the program. So depending on the resources and need, programs can build on existing institutions or establish a new set of arrangements, and also build technical capacity along the way. Stakeholder engagement is very necessary, and it can happen during various stages in developing the program. Especially for a mandatory program, it's a critical step. It helps to secure buy-in, it helps to resolve conflicts and build consensus around potentially sticky issues, promotes transparency, builds confidence, facilitates compliance and submission of good quality data, because you're also building capacity along the way through engaging stakeholders. Now, the next step here is to look at the design elements themselves. What is it that the program will be targeting, will be looking at? So this is where the major program structure related questions are resolved. So what should be the program coverage? Which quantification methodologies for various sectors should be used? What level of detail should be provided in accompanying regulations? The more the detail, the more consistency you can strive for in emissions data. What to report and how often? Where to report, what are the reporting procedures and schedules, who verifies this information, what measures to apply in case of non-compliance, etc. And again, looking at the clock, I will skip this slide and just conclude my part of the presentation with talking a little bit about where to begin. So building a GHG reporting program can be a huge undertaking. At the same time, countries can take small steps towards the establishment of the program. And I think one of the first ones is a focus on building capacity. So start engaging with stakeholders and also developing a consensus around the issues, the program itself, the need for the program, and around a set of long-term objectives. And begin the program in a pilot phase. That's also a possibility, that you begin in a pilot phase at a smaller scale, starting with a few major sectors and then expanding participation over time. So here is you'll have these slides, and here are some additional resources to look at. There's an e-learning course on this material as well. And so thank you. That brings me to the end of my presentation. And I would like to now invite my colleague Sebastian from the Colombian Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development to give us a country perspective on MRV of emissions at entity level from Colombia. Sebastian, over to you. And I can move the slides for you. I can't see my controls, so if Sebastian is muted by the organizers, please make sure he's unmuted. Okay, I hear something.
Yeah, now it's okay, the microphone. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this webinar. And thank you, Nilam, for this introduction. As you said, I will present in a few slides our perspective from the government side about the reporting and the MRB practices in Colombia. And well, next slide, please. I would like to start with the general framework of the climate change policy implementation in Colombia. We have a lot of things happening at this time in our country. We are in the process of the implementation of the green growth strategy for our economy. This green growth implementation is part also of the OECD acceptation process. Colombia is part of the OECD from a few weeks ago. And there is an important point for the climate change policy implementation and all the strategies related to the low carbon emissions activities in our country. We also have a commitment under the Paris Agreement, our NDC, and we are in the process of the policy development for the SDG implementations in Colombia. And there is also a very important process happening in Colombia this time, and is the peace consolidation process. The peace consolidation process is aligned with all the other general policy development process in the country. We are in the process of the stop of the conflict, and we are now a lot of people moving from the armed conflict to the rural sites, to the forestry sites, and it is very important for us to align all of this process in the country with the peace consolidation agreement. Next slide, please. Well, about our NDC, Colombia's a commitment for the 2030 is the 20% of our reductions from our BAU scenario. We hope to have these reductions for the whole economy. It's a wide economy target, and we start to promote MRB practices in our country from 4 years ago until today. At this time, we already have a technological platform for the registry of mitigation actions. We have a technological platform for the national GHG inventories, and those technological tools are also guided by the regulatory documents. At this time, we have a first proposal for MRB regulation, and we have in place also on implementation a carbon tax from the January of 2017. So we have this time a year and a half of implementation of a carbon tax. All of these economic instruments and technological platforms and regulatory documents are part of our NDC implementation. And inside of all of these efforts, it's very important to have a clear reporting instruments. So it is very important for us to have to be improving the information related to our performance and the implementation of those policies and also of these economic instruments. Next slide, please. Well, there is our climate change policy. This is the general perspective of the climate change policy in Colombia. We have 5 strategic lines aligned with the rural development, urban development, energy, mining, and infrastructure from an ecosystem management and conservation point of view. Those are the milestones of the climate change policy implementation in Colombia. We have 4 support lines. I would like just to talk about the support line in information and science, technology, and research. Here is our MRB system, and this is the reason why we are thinking about the reporting instruments for all the strategic lines. So in order to have good information from the agro-industrial sector and the process industry sector in Colombia, also the energy production or generation, we are promoting the reporting practices. We already have a voluntary reporting program. I think that my colleague Sandra will talk about it in the next slides. And we are also promoting the implementation of mitigation actions in all the economic sectors in Colombia. That's the reason why we open for everyone this national registry where everyone can put everyone can put the information related to their mitigation actions, and it's part of our MRB system. We also have an support or a climate finance MRB platform. This platform is managed by our national planning department, and we are promoting the reporting practices in all the actors engaged on the implementation of this climate change policy. Next slide, please. Well, about the means of implementation, we are promoting the climate finance from, as I said some minutes ago, through the implementation of a carbon tax. We are also promoting the green investment in Colombia and renewable energies and the forestry sector and the low carbon energy sources. And we are very committed and worry also about how to track the implementation of that capital flows. That's the reason why we have been working with our national planning department on the development of this MRB for climate finance action. And we think that this is very important for us to improve the practices about the calculation of indicators, about the transparency on the reports, the uncertainty related to our information management tools, not only because we are tracking finance, we are also promoting the use of public resources to promote those actions. So for the government, it is very important to have clear information to track the progress of the public investments. I would like also to say something about the approach of our climate change actions. For Colombia government, it is important to have the engagement of local governments and also from the private sector. That's the reason we have a climate change policy scope for the economic sectors from private sector and also for the territories. We are engaging mayors and local governments on the implementation of our actions, and it is important to have everyone on the same page about the reporting and the tracking of the progress of their actions. We have a decentralized government system about implementation of actions in infrastructure or energy, for example, and it is important to have the same protocols. It is important to use the same tools, and it is important for us to use the same practices about MRV from all the stakeholders. And well, that's the reason why at this time we have this first proposal of MRV, and trying to put everyone on the same page. And next one, please. Well, that's what I was talking. We have a specific implementation plans for the transportation sector, for the mines and energy, agriculture, housing, health, public finance, commerce, industry, and insurance. In mitigation and adaptation, we are promoting the implementation of many activities on those economic sectors from the perspective of the private sector and the public sector. As I said, we are engaging local governments, and well, where all of them are important for the government. We need to improve the information related the information related with the energy sector, the industrial processes, and the product use, the agriculture, forestry, and other land use. It's very important if we see this economic sector from the GHG emissions point of view. That's one of our main challenges. Improve and reduce uncertainty in the information related to the affluent sector is an enormous challenge for our country. We already have a national forestry monitoring system, which is under development from the last 4 years, but we know that we need to improve that system. We are trying to link the mitigation actions from the forestry sector with the avoid of the payment of our national carbon tax. This is an innovative way to link those sectors. I mean, the people who is consuming fossil fuels with the people who is implementing mitigation projects on the forestry sector. And from this mechanism, we learned that it is very important to have a clear view about the use of methodologies, the practices of verification and accreditation of verifiers. It is very, very strategic to choose the right protocols, the right practices about the engagement of the stakeholders promoting mitigation actions. Registries are also very important at the national and international level, and now Colombia is implementing their own accreditation scheme from the national accreditation institution. And in all the mitigation actions in Colombia, we are promoting also the co-benefits in adaptation. It's not only mitigation by itself. Colombia has a high risk and vulnerability exposure, and that's the reason why we are trying to promote the coexistence of both approaches in our climate action initiatives. Next, please. Well, this is an important part of the presentation, just to raise a point about the importance of the legal framework and for the MRV practices in the country. It is a good thing for Colombia to have in our national development plan. This plan is finishing this year. And a mandatory requirement to have sectoral plans for adaptation and mitigation, and quantitative sectoral GHG reduction targets for 2020, 2025, and 2030. And in this plan, we also have a mandate to create a national registry and the first accounting rules for the country. Without this law, it will be impossible to have these tools at this time. So we start with this as part of our of the development plan that our president proposed for this period of government, and now that's now we have a general national law or a general national act on the Congress for discussion to continue with the efforts. It is not easy to ask everyone for their information. We need to have a legal background to get this information, and we start with this National Development Plan law, and we are continue with General Climate Change Law for Colombia, just to have the right means to get the information, to track progress, to promote the implementation of market practices in all sectors, and also at the local government level. Next one, please. Just a short comment about the OECD process. As I said, at this time we have a voluntary reporting program. We have been working with WRI from the last 4 years till today, increasing and building capacities in companies from a voluntary approach. We have a trainer for trainers. We have many workshops about just to present the importance of reporting. Promoting the GHG Protocol, explaining why it is important to do the reports on the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, and the difference between them. And this is part of the need of build capacities just to start the discussion. So from my last slide, it is important to have a legal background, and it is also important to build capacity to have a common understanding of these practices. Now, as part of the OECD acceptation process for Colombia, it is mandatory to have a PRTR, the Voluntary Release and Transfer Register. And we are including GHG emissions on this registry. Our first approach for the PRTR in Colombia is based on the information related to fixed sources and energy consumption. So we can think about some sources in the scope 1 for companies, and also scope 2 for energy consumption. This PRTR will be asking information at the facility level, and we think that this is the first step to a mandatory approach. We are asking in a mandatory way the information related to the sources for the PRTR, and we are also asking information about mitigation actions for the carbon tax mechanism. So that's the Colombian approach. We are trying to go in different ways to a mandatory approach, and we hope to continue on this line, hoping to have a mandatory program by the first half of the 2020 decade. Next one, and I think that's my last slide. And I would like to pass, the presentation to my colleague Sandra Bravo. Many thanks for your attention.
Sandra, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Nilan. Thank you very much, Sebastian. In the next slides, I'm going to present the situation of Colombia regarding corporate standard, corporate reporting. As you can see on the slide, in the country, many organizations are involved in different initiatives related to sustainable reporting, GHG emission reporting, and initiatives to reduce and offset GHG emissions. Many companies, or the increase in weather, extreme weather events has aroused an interest from companies to understand climate change and also GHG emissions. Mainly large-size organizations participate in international initiatives like CDP, GRI, CSI, and World Steel. And at national level, initiatives have been developed to engage organizations of all sizes in the road towards low carbon development and provide technical assistance to assess and manage their carbon footprint. One of the main initiatives in Colombia was MBC Colombia that ended in 2016. And this initiative developed three working components. One of them focused to provide training and support to organizations to estimate, monitor, manage, and reduce carbon footprint. At subnational level, we also have an important initiative that is called Cali Carbon Neutral Program, and it's an initiative for the city of Cali at southwest of Colombia, which seeks to promote the production of goods and services with the smallest possible carbon footprint in the city. Participation in this program includes recognizing organizations according to progress in different stages of the program. Other wider initiatives at subnational level like Progresa and PREAD, shown on the right corner of the slide, are more focused on environmental and social sustainability, but also are supporting the organization to integrate in their assessment the carbon footprint. Next slide, please. Even though the existence of different initiatives, still some issues remain as a barrier to expand the number of organizations that estimate and report their GHG emissions, which, as you could saw in the last slide, is still limited. Problems like the need for standardized and comparable information on the emissions of the organizations. There are many initiatives, many methodologies, and also many institutions providing support, but there's no coordination between them. Also, the skills for the estimation and reporting of GHG emission in the organization are overestimated. So to overcome this barrier, different institutions from public and private sector started to work in developing a voluntary program to promote estimation and report of GHG emissions, but also to join and coordinate the effort of these different institutions. Next slide, please. The voluntary program is integrated by two components, the capacity building component and the tools. The capacity building component is focused on the development of skills and knowledge for the estimation and report of GHG emission through training workshops. This component is very important as allow to prepare the organization to develop better quality estimation and to engage organization in the estimation and manage of GHG emission steadily in the time. The second component is a web-based tool to facilitate the access to information and technical assistance, but also to facilitate estimation and report of GHG emission. This tool allows an organization to calculate, store, and report their GHG emission inventories in different periods of time. Includes a calculator that uses emissions factors and global warming potential updated and adjusted to the Colombian context. Additionally, allows to establish the traceability criteria of activity data for quality assurance and quality control. These calculation tools bases its operation on methodological guidelines of the GHG Protocol and ISO 40064. Next slide, please. This capacity building process has been supported by WRI through cooperation projects, as Sebastian mentioned, with the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, and has the goal to develop a technical capacity to account and report GHG emission in organization according to the guidelines of the GHG Protocol. The benefits of this process is that has allowed early participation of different organizations, increased their confidence, and promote open communication. The process has been developed through 2.5-day training workshops for organizations in all sectors, including public institutions. Started in 2015 with a training course for trainers, the trainer of trainers, in the GHG Protocol corporate standard. The people certified as a trainer served as the basis to continue the process of transfer of knowledge transfer between professionals and organizations. Next slide, please. Here you can see some results of this capacity building process. To the day, we have trained 243 people in 6 different cities of the country free of charge. The training material has also been adapted to Colombia and include practical exercise more close to the national reality and the characteristics of Colombian organization. A key element in this process is that has been supported by other partner institutions that have contributed to the successful development of the workshop. Next slide, please. One of the key partners in this process of voluntary reporting program is the NAMA industry. The NAMA industry started implementation at the end of 2016, financed by the Global Environmental Facility, supported by the UNDP and administered by the Corporate Environmental Corporation of the Chamber of Commerce of Bogotá. This NAMA seeks the implementation of energy efficiency in the industrial productive processes and helps companies to identify at what stage of production they could reduce the energy consumption and where companies are spending energy unnecessarily. The components of the NAMA are 3. One of them is capacity building. So this is why NAMA industry is the one who will be administrating the web-based tool or the platform for voluntary reporting. Next slide, please. The NAMA doesn't give money directly to the companies, but advises them to make decisions to reduce its energy consumption through 5-step intervention process, as you can see in the slide. Until April 2018, the savings of the companies involved in the NAMA are around 5% of the initial consumption. Next slide, please. So here, finally, some remarks learning from the perspective of the organization. This is just to emphasize that the work around the corporate reporting in Colombia is in progress and still a lot of work to do to maximize the benefits and overcome the barriers identified by organization, but in the same approach that Colombia has been doing with joint and coordinated efforts of different institutions involved. I think that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Sebastian. And before we open up for questions or take questions that have been sent in, I just wanted to highlight that we do have a few more upcoming webinars for over the next 6 months. And the very next one here is on July 10th, another Tuesday, on measuring subnational level emissions. And you can register at the link at the very bottom of the slide, wri.org/2018 TASCA-webinar-series. So please feel free to go there to the link and register for one or more webinars. And with that, we are concluding the presentation. And may I ask one of my colleagues to help us through the questions, or I will
Hi, everyone. This is Pauline Hill from the World Resources Institute. Feel free to chat or submit your questions formally in the questions tab. The only questions, the question that we received so far is, will we get the slides after the webinar? And WRI would like to confirm that we have attached the slides in the handouts tab, if you can see that in the interface here. There's a TASCA webinar template and a guide attached.
And the question around how to get trainer for trainers workshop. So I mean, I don't know what exactly the attendee was asking, but if you are asking for a package of like a package of presentations, or unless you're asking about how to participate in a trainer for trainers workshop. So in the past, WRI has done these kind of workshops in various countries, depending on, well, the funding, the interest, who invited us, etc. So we have done those in a bit more systematic manner in the past. So it all depends on whether we have colleagues working in the countries where there is demand for such a workshop and what we are able to arrange. We don't organize that here at WRI or through a webinar. It is generally an in-person training workshop spread over generally 2 days, followed by a day of opportunities given to attendees to present or to take some quizzes, exams, etc., to make sure that they can be given a certificate for trainers. So that's generally the format. I hope I answered the question. So there's another question that's come up on what's your take on the ACT methodology developed by CDP and ADEM from France? I am actually not aware of this methodology. Unless any of my colleagues are, please feel free to chime in. I don't know what this methodology is about, so I apologize. I can try to follow up with you unless anyone amongst the other panelists are aware of it. There's a question on how are corporate webinars for entity level emissions offered. You can go to our website, GHG Protocol. So the GHG Protocol website, WRI and WBCSD's joint initiative, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, offers these training program. Greenhouse Gas Protocol is also one of our flagship standards is the corporate standard. So you can go to our website, ghgprotocol.org, to the training page, online training page, and you will see information about registering for corporate webinars on the website. I think there's one coming up either in June or July. Very soon there's one coming up, so you can register online. Okay, we are almost at 10 o'clock. I don't see any more questions coming up. So once again, feel free to write to us. Our contact information of all the panelists is provided here, and this presentation, everyone will receive it as handout as well. And if you have any information on, if you have any questions on upcoming webinars, please feel free to contact either me or preferably Cynthia Elliott, my colleague who is managing, who's helping organize all these webinars, and her contact information is also available here. So with that, thank you very much, and thanks for joining. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day also. And thanks, Nilan, and all of your team.
Thank you, panelists. Yes.